Hello, third grade, and welcome back to History with Mrs. Colley. We are moving on to the third Punic War today. I know it's been a long wait, and there have been some great predictions made, but let me tell you, the third Punic War is it's kind of a letdown, to be honest. The second one was big and massive and epic, and there were battles everywhere, and there were great heroes and great triumphs, and the third Punic War isn't so much of that. So 149 BC, after another period of peace, Rome thinks that Carthage is rebuilding for war again. Now remember, they were only allowed to have 10 ships in their navy to fight off pirates. They weren't allowed to have an army. They weren't allowed to train soldiers or have a military. They were a completely destroyed city. And now all that was left of them, they were just trying to get on with their lives. But for some reason, people in Rome thought that they were rebuilding. And actually, Rome didn't think Carthage was rebuilding. A specific person thought that Carthage was rebuilding. That specific person was the Senator Cato. Cato, although known as a very great statesman, an incredible senator, and very intelligent, he was also rather bitter at the Carthage Empire, at Carthaginian Empire, and honestly had hoped that Scipio would have just destroyed it in the Second Punic War instead of making a peace and taking money. Cato despised Scipio for that. And so because of that, he continued back in Rome, continued to point out all of Scipio's mistakes, and then took it upon himself to gear up people to attack Rome. Things like he would have great grand speeches in the Senate or in the Forum, and every single speech that he did, even if it had nothing to do with Carthage, would end with the words, Carthago delenda est, which means Carthage must be destroyed. Every single speech. So every single person that listened to him speak, it could have been about food, and it would end with Carthage must be destroyed. He was just getting in people's heads. He also traveled to Carthage in 157 BC, and he feared that he saw growing prosperity there. No, he saw people getting on with their lives and people starting up businesses and starting to plant and grow farms and have a life. Carthage was practically destroyed, and they were pretty much ridiculously poor because they were giving all their money to Rome. So there wasn't really much left. But he thought they were a growing empire and they were going to turn on Rome. In one dramatic act that has been written down, is that he came to the Senate floor and flung figs out of his toga and said, "Look, these figs were growing in Carthage. There is prosperity there. People are happy. They're growing stronger every day, and they are going to plan for our defeat." Now remember, Rome is really large at this time, and Carthage is really small. Like, Carthage is like 1/50th of the Roman Empire at this point. Carthage is not planning to attack Rome, but Cato thinks so. So, yep, they take on Carthage. Eventually, Cato's friends and allies rally around and they make a decision to go and attack Carthage for once and for all and just to take it down. They couldn't trust them, so they decided to take them down. Yes, that's an Angry Bird catapult. No, the Angry Bird catapults were not around in the siege of Carthage, but catapults were around in the siege of Carthage, and that was one of the ways they were able to take the Great Walls of Carthage down. Now, it did take 3 years to take the Great Wall of Carthage down, but and it was a pretty strong fortress, but they did take it down, and Rome won. Carthage is captured. Every single person is taken out of Carthage, and if they're important, they are brought into the military. If they're less important, or if they don't have a lot of money, or they're poor people, they were sold into slavery. And if they had lots and lots of money, they could usually buy their way into being a Roman citizen. But otherwise, Carthage is captured and the war is over. Now, a few residents, they believe, possibly escaped before the siege, but really most of them died. The population at the time was estimated to be around 250 to 500,000 people, and only 50,000 of those surrendered. The rest were either killed or taken, captured, and sold into slavery. Now, that being said, that's a lot of people. That's a lot. That's over 250,000 people that were sold into slavery and captured and taken by the Romans. That seems like a very large amount. Keep in mind, there's only one source of information that we're getting this from, and that is Polybius. And he was writing to inform the citizens of Rome, but he was also writing in order for the Greeks to surrender to Rome at this time. At this time, during the Third Punic War, the Greeks and the Romans are also in a pretty fierce battle for territory. So Polybius is happy to put into the news anything that will make Rome seem pretty fantastic and great and unbeatable. It's kind of what the news does today in a lot of ways. They sensationalize things and make things look bigger and grander or scarier than things really are, and use big fancy headlines that are sometimes misleading and maybe not true. So even back in the time of Rome, you had to be very careful about where you got your source of information from. Think of Polybius as Facebook. Is the only source you're getting it from. It might not be completely accurate. Always double check and make sure you have 2 or 3 sources of that certain news or that story so that you know it's true. So although we take some information from Polybius as absolutely true, we're not completely sure on this. After the victory, Scipio wanted to wash his hands. He was done. He didn't think they should have gone in and taken Carthage in the first place. Now he was really just done and wanted to retire. Unfortunately, Scipio reluctantly, and this is according to 2 sources now, so we have 2 sources backing this up, that Scipio really didn't want to do this, but he did. He was following orders. He wasn't in charge anymore. He wasn't a dictator. There were other generals, the consuls were on top or higher up than him, and they said, nope, this is what you must do. So the entire city was completely leveled, and the legend has it is that the ground was sowed with salt, which means that they buried everything, they destroyed everything, they leveled the land, and then they coated the land with salt. And what that does is it prevents things from growing on it for a really long time, like hundreds of years, so that Carthage couldn't come back in and rebuild and regrow farmland and start over. It was an absolute loss on the hands of the Carthaginians. Now, is that fully true? Well, it's a little mix again. Some historians think that maybe some dams were broken and they let the water wash over the land, or flooding had caused that area to become coated with salt. But layers of salt have been found, dating back as they date the ground, for those of you in geology, as you date the layers of ground, you know this. Uh, they have found layers of salt that date back to this time, 2,000 years ago. Whether or not that's from flooding or from one of these other stories, they're not sure. But we do know that Scipio did completely destroy the city itself and leveled it. He was not too happy about that either. So after this whole scenario, he went back to Rome. And instead of going back to Rome being a hero, he went back to Rome with Cato again, on him completely, complaining about he should have done this the first time. What an awful general you must be. You had to follow orders. You could come up with these plans by yourself. Um, and then started to question his integrity and uh, started questioning where all the money went that they got from Carthage from the Second Punic War, and how much of that did Scipio actually take, and how much of it was he paid, but how much did he just, squirrel away with his generals? What was he trustworthy enough to continue to be a general in the Roman army? Cato was not a nice person and made Scipio pretty miserable. So Scipio decided he wasn't even going to fight. He wasn't even going to fight it. He wasn't going to sink to the level that Cato was sinking to. And he left Rome, built a villa outside of Rome's borders, and lived there the rest of his life until he died. Um, when he died, it's tradition for Romans to have their, especially very famous ones, very important heroes of war, to be carried into the city and have a tribute parade in a way, and then be buried within Rome's borders in a very royal cemetery, a special plot of land. But he refused. He even put it in his will that he refused to be buried in Rome, that he would not give them the satisfaction of being being carried around as a hero, because they had treated him so poorly when he came back from the Third Punic War. He was pretty set on that. So he got his way in the end. Um, so that is that's the pretty sad ending to the Third Punic War. After this, though, Rome is absolutely a world power. They have a crazy amount of territory to cover, and you're going to find out moving forward that that's a lot of territory for a Senate and two consuls to rule over. So what are they going to do? Well, we'll see. It might be the end of the Roman Republic as we know it.